Fright Night, which is a remake of 1980s sort of horror comedy, which I remember seeing. I remember really clearly seeing it. I went to see it at the Screen 6 to 9 in Manchester, and I went to see it very excited because it was advertised with a picture, a very iconic picture of a vampire smile, of a female character with a smile that literally went from ear to ear. And it was one of those sort of strange things in which the image was so striking, was so iconic, that you thought, gosh, the film must be really, really good. Because the film actually failed to live up to the strikingness of that image. But it was still a kind of, quite fun, creaky old comedy horror. The idea was that there was somebody realised that vampires had moved into their local town. Roddy McDowall was a sort of washed-up actor now presenting a Fright Night TV show. The teenager goes to him and says, look, I need to know how to deal with vampires. He says, well, what do I know? I'm just somebody who does this stuff on TV. But in fact, it turns out that actually the stuff that you do on TV turns out to have more reality than perhaps one would expect. The remake is written by Martin Oxon, who, of course, worked on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it's directed by Craig Gillespie, and has David Tennant taking over the role of the person who is the showman to whom the teenager goes saying, look, we need to deal with a vampire problem. This time the action is in Las Vegas. Our teenage hero figures out that the person next door, Colin Farrell, is a vampire, and therefore goes to see David Tennant's character, who runs this great big splashy Las Vegas show in which he appears to fight demons on stage, but of course it's all to do with special effects and all the rest of it. David Tennant clearly channeling the ghost of Russell Brand. Here's a clip.
So, I'm the expert for your vampire thing, huh? They're all the rage, eh? Oh, leather, it don't breathe, you know. Shoot.
Right. Well, okay, look, I know your show. I know your show's an illusion.
Yeah, fair enough.
But say I wanted to kill a vampire.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
How would I go about doing that?
You want to know how to kill a vampire? Seriously?
Yeah, kill a vampire.
Well, let's think. Well, you got fire, beheading. You can make him a big garlicky omelette. Or go traditional, stake through the heart. BAM!
Cool. So that stuff really works?
Well, maybe not the omelette.
See, the thing is, I really like David Tennant, and I really like the idea of him doing this role. And in fact, in those scenes, when the teenager goes to him and says, "How do I do all this stuff?" and as he's explaining it to him, he's taking off the wig, he's taking off the moustache, he's taking off the leather trousers, and he's doing the David. It's a fairly sweary part as well, and he's clearly enjoying himself enormously, which I think is great. David Tennant is a very, very physical performer, and it is fun to see him doing that. Also, Colin Farrell, who plays the next-door neighbour, who's supposed to be feral but attractive and mysterious and yet, dangerous and dark, does a very good job with that as well. What you're therefore left with wondering is why it is that Fright Night isn't as good as you want it to be. That's not to say that it's no fun at all, because actually, whilst I was watching it, I was enjoying it. There were many things in it that I quite liked. As I said, I particularly like David Tennant, I particularly like Colin Farrell. I think the difficulty is this. Comedy horror is a very hard thing to do. There are very few movies that get the balance between the comedic and the horrifying completely right, because obviously laughing and screaming are very closely related, and it is often the case in horror films that you get laughter, by accident, and it is also the case that it is possible to laugh and be scared at the same time. The classic example, of course, is Evil Dead. I mean, Steve Woolley, who was here in Shetland yesterday, the guy who was responsible for the Evil Dead, getting the widespread distribution that it did in the UK, and that's a classic case. I also think, as I've said this before, Shaun of the Dead is one of those cases in which it works because although it's funny, it is at its heart, it is still a respectful zombie movie that does understand that there is an underlying horror at work there. The problem with Fright Night, the remake of Fright Night, and to some extent the original Fright Night, although the original Fright Night did have a sort of creaky charm, although actually, to be honest with you, it doesn't hold up very well now, is that it isn't funny or scary enough to be a proper full-blooded comedy horror, which is not to say that it's not gory, because actually in some sections it is quite gory, it is quite full on, there's quite a lot of splattery effects, and a lot of them are done with CGI stuff, but it is quite upfront in its in its desire to have the trappings of a horror movie. The problem is that at no point was I genuinely scared. One, but fine, it's Fright Night. It's not meant to be genuinely scary, but it could have done with being creepier. And it is funny, but it's not funny enough. And it's one of those really weird cases. I was quoted, I said a thing in an article recently when I said this tongue-in-cheek, I said, as a film critic, my role is explaining to people why they haven't enjoyed films even when they think they have.
I read that in your book.
No,
Are
I know.
you reproducing your book in an article and getting paid again?
No.
And you're quoting yourself.
Yes, but there's a point to this, which is that seems to be, to be the sort of, the most pompous thing it's possible to say.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And as I said, we meant tongue-in-cheek, but the funny thing with Fright Night was that although whilst I was in the cinema with it, I kind of enjoyed it perfectly fine. The more I think about it, the more I think that I didn't enjoy it as much as I think I did. The more I can hear myself explaining to myself why it was that I didn't enjoy it as much as I
You're hearing voices again?
Yeah, I am. But the difference is the voice is mine. And the
That's
voice
just
is mine
as
saying,
bad.
Yeah, the voice is mine saying, yes, well, you kind of smiled through that bit and you kind of laughed at that bit because you really like David Tennant and you thought that particular bit worked well, but it doesn't add up to very much. Now, I know it's not meant to add up to very much. It is meant to be a remake of Fright Night. But when you look at what you've got with all the constituent elements and actually, everything that happened with Buffy and the fact that it is now possible to make very interesting, very intelligent, to make something that does something more than simply be kind of okay and kind of fun and sort of, all right. My problem with Fright Night was that it is what it is, but it isn't enough of what it is. I wanted it to be more fun, and it was fun, but not enough. I wanted it to be much more scary, and it wasn't scary at all. I wanted, I liked the David Tennant role, but it wasn't enough to hold the whole thing together. I thought Colin Farrell did his part well, but it wasn't enough. So it's funny. It's like that whole thing about, candy floss, that the minute you've eaten it, it's completely gone, and then afterwards you feel a little bit like, oh, well, I really shouldn't have done that. At the time that I was watching it, it was moderately diverting and I smiled a bit. The 3D is complete nonsense and you don't need it at all, but I think you've heard that before.
I think we probably have.
But I wanted to be more enthusiastic about it, and it was fine, but nothing more than fine, and I enjoyed it more when I was watching it than I did afterwards thinking about it.
Well, on balance, it's better to enjoy it while you're watching it.
Yes, exactly, which is why I'm saying that even as I'm saying what's wrong with it, that to say that I hadn't enjoyed it at the time would be untrue. I sort of, it was at the time I sort of smiled and I sort of chuckled and I sort of felt a degree of goodwill towards it, whilst all the time remembering that it was a remake of a film that the first time I saw it was flawed enough that none of it lived up to the promise of that one picture, that one image of the vampire smile. I remember very clearly me and Phil Gladwin opening a copy of City Life.
Who's Phil Gladwin?
He was the guy I lived with in Manchester when I saw it the first time at the screen 6 to 9, seeing the picture of that face and going, wow, that film looks brilliant.